Rachel, thank you so much for joining us this morning. The world is in absolute flux, which obviously, as innovators and investors, presents us both with uncertainty, but also opportunity. I'm very interested in your take on both.
So yeah, I think it's, well, first of all, it's lovely to be here, and thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do. And thank Bryony for me as well. So I think it's very difficult when you wake up every day and read the newspapers or listen to the headlines and not be deeply concerned that we're falling away from the collective ambition of 10 years ago at the Paris Agreement. And clearly, for part of the political spectrum, or parts of the political spectrum, there's been an attempt to sort of make toxic this collective commitment to net zero for different reasons. But I'm here to tell you that in my work traveling around the world for this government and listening to what countries are trying to do and where countries' ambition is, those headlines don't represent the sort of the silent majority, right? So most countries are not changing direction. The point on the horizon to which everybody is headed remains the same. It's more and more urgent. The politics and the atmosphere multilaterally have become, unpleasant, difficult, contentious. And so countries are trying to figure out, well, how do we get there despite all of this sort of white noise and worse? And so whether it's at the International Maritime Organization a few weeks ago, where despite intense pressure to not do so, the majority of countries agreed to put a levy on dirty shipping fuels, or whether last week here in London where we convened about 60 ministers to talk about energy security, which is based on a vision of the energy systems of the world which is very much more renewable than now. Most countries have got their sleeves rolled up. They're looking for the policy frameworks that allow them to build the grids that will carry green electrons, that will power everything that we need, and everything that grows off that can advance. And the amount of innovation in the financial sector, between the financial sector and energy and transport and agribusiness is quite extraordinary. I think we have a real challenge of scale. So how do you take all of this innovation and scale? And we need to be able to protect the dialogue between the private sector and government around this agenda. That itself is under attack in many, many countries. But the going was never going to be easy. The going is, when the going gets tough, all of you, the tough, just have to get going.
Thank you. You touched there on the challenge of scaling, the challenge of making sure that public and private are working collaboratively, radical collaboration that we possibly haven't seen before. In all of your experience working at the World Bank, with the role you currently have, obviously professor at the Blavatnik School as well, how are we going to go about doing this? It's not going to happen by osmosis.
No, so I think, well, it's a transition, right? So it doesn't go at the same pace every day, and there are leaps forward within that transition. And I think that one of the powerful roles that business and finance and innovators play is persuading the public sector, persuading politicians and policymakers that, having a cautious approach to transition is not actually in line with delivering a consistent result. Transitions can actually go very, very, very fast, and that's okay. And then maybe they slow down. I mean, look at the way in which Europe and the UK and others pivoted after Russia invaded Ukraine. That was like overnight, right? And suddenly all kinds of things changed as a result. So I think helping policymakers and politicians understand S-curves, understand how they build on each other, understand that you can go really fast and then consolidate and then go fast again, that we're not talking about just putting one step in front of the other. Underneath all of that, the results have to be steady for the public to be able to understand that the innovation delivers for them. So when I think about the fact that it's taken decades to get an interconnector built between Zambia and Tanzania and Malawi, which will, you think, well, why is that important? Well, that joins the South African grid to the East African grid. So you can imagine a grid all the way from Cairo to South Africa with all of the hyper power of renewable energy possible in the African continent, able to serve everybody, right? We've taken us years to get to this point, but as soon as it's done, then that opens up all kinds of investable opportunities for people here and around the world. And I can go around the world, the North Sea, the collapse of the wind industry off the coast of Massachusetts as a result of public policy is opportunity elsewhere. But the juggernaut of renewable energy investment going into the United States is not paying attention to the negative messages coming out of Washington. So wherever we are in the world, that collaboration is happening. It needs to be sustained, but the voice of you in this room to government to sort of reassure people that you can make a decision today and the payoff might not be for a while, but it will set off things now which provide jobs and security to people. This is really important.
So I'm hearing very strongly the transition is underway, it is unstoppable.
Yep.
The narrative is one that we need to wrestle back, we need to face down our critics, but the finance, the innovation, we saw $2.1 trillion according to BNAF invested in clean energy last year. Yes, 818 billion of that in China, but what was very interesting, I think from a financier's perspective, was looking at, I think, the vast majority of that, with the exception of 150 billion, was in things like grids, power, transport, where from a finance perspective, those models are already well understood. The 154 billion went into the sort of first of a kind, the earlier of a kind technologies that we also need to see scale, the real innovation that we need to see over the next decade. So I think that's a lot of where the challenge sits for us as financiers, to be working with the policymakers to figure out what are the forensic, granular policies required to actually enable finance to flow.
So I'm getting on a plane on the weekend to go to Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, all of whom are looking to the UK's domestic experience in terms of how they take their policy framework forward. I was also in India recently with Ed Miliband, and there, the Indians, as they want to start opening up their offshore wind industry off the coast of Gujarat and off the coast of Tamil Nadu, what they're asking us for is a very different partnership than they used to ask the UK for. Now what they're looking for is the technical advice, the know-how in this room and within our sort of statutory bodies about how to build the policy framework that allows that to happen, how to manage it well, and then how our investor base understands the opportunities. Because then what they're going to need are two things. One, access to that technical advice so that they can go fast, but also a little bit of risk-bearing capital, but I mean a thin layer that will allow them to access their domestic savings, right? We're not talking about public money from Europe or from the UK. So their domestic savings into the front end of their green energy revolution. The back end of it is now fully commercial, right? This is how far India's come in just a decade. And so this is what it means now to be a partner as the UK, as UK Inc. and as UK institutions in a global transition. And I could give you many more examples of that, which means that we have to be, as UK Inc. and UK government, completely joined up so that we can be of assistance. Because, and I think this is really important, right, as we manage our own energy transition, some bits are going well, some bits could go better. We've got policy calibration, and I work closely with Chris Stark. He's focused domestically. I'm sort of selling what he's doing internationally. We also know that 99% of global emissions are coming from other places than the UK. That is not a reason to disengage. That is not a reason to give up our own ambitions. That is precisely the reason to engage, because we've got something the rest of the world needs. And if those 99% emissions aren't curbed faster and quicker, it's going to be bad for us as a vulnerable island off the coast of Europe in the Atlantic in a world of climate crisis.
It was Chris Skidmore, I think, who said that the race to net zero is a race for investment. Yep. And that ability to show UK leadership on the world stage, as you're doing, is so important. The inevitable question, what gives you optimism about UK's leadership on this agenda right now?
Well, so it's no secret that our own fiscal space is severely constrained, right? And so, for many years, and in particular in the politics, international politics of how climate has been discussed, this basic tenet that we have common but differentiated responsibilities, so that the countries that brought us to this crisis because of our industrial histories and our colonial histories, have, to be there to help other countries who didn't cause the problem through the transition. So that often gets boiled down into, well, you should transfer money from here to here, right? But I mean, that has worked up to an extent, but it could never work completely. And so now the world has moved on. The world is flatter, it's more multipolar. The world now, as you said at the beginning, is in flux. We've got spheres of interest where the US and Europe and the UK and China are all sort of working out where we collaborate, what that collaboration means. So in that world, you now have, I think, a world where everybody wants trade and investment. So whether you're South Africa or you're India or Brazil or Indonesia, or whether you're one of these big lower middle income or middle income countries whose transition pathways are directly material to whether or not we reach net zero, that's a question of trade, but it's a question of investment opportunity for us, but also for them into what we're doing in our transition. So it's a much more equal relationship. And then for poorer countries, for countries that really are in harm's way through no fault of their own, we do have to find creative ways to support them. But that's also happening through trade and investment, and through blending finance, and through some of the innovation that many of you are involved in. And so it isn't, climate change does not differentiate between countries, between the rich and the poor, within a country. I mean, yes, the rich have means to get out of the harm's way, but we saw in California that only goes so far. And so the question, I think, for all of us is, can we take this spirit of solidarity that we've had for the last few decades in the result of climate negotiations and transfer that into the opportunities for investment and making private and public money flow to where it's most needed, not only because there's an opportunity for return and an opportunity for that investment to work, but also because 19 years ago, Lord Nicholas Stern said for the first time that the cost of inaction was going to be so much higher than the cost of action. And I think if we're responsible for anything, in the last 19 years, we have not translated that basic tenet into public policy, and we will need to do that. But for now, all of the innovation represented in this room is absolutely essential. The public sector has got to make it easier for that to scale, but the level of innovation is what gives me hope.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for spending time with us this morning. And if the audience, you could join me in thanking Rachel Kyte.